CBS presents Working for Religious Freedom. The narrator is Ted Holmes.
We still are, the most religiously free place in the world. I think of it as the boldest and most successful experiment in religious freedom the world has ever seen. But I think we face new challenges in the 21st century that we've never faced before. And if we don't make sure that we keep going back and trying to live up to the First Amendment and religious freedom, we're not going to be able to live together with these religious differences.
On July 4th, 2012, in Joplin, Missouri, an unidentified man attempted to set fire to the local mosque.
There was an attempt that was caught on video of a man approaching the mosque, throwing something like a Molotov cocktail onto the roof of the building. That fire did not catch. That person is still at large.
1 month later, the community woke to the news that the same mosque had burnt to the ground.
The community was there to watch the mosque's roof collapse. There was nothing left of the mosque. It was just ashes.
Qadir Abbas is a lawyer with CAIR, the Council of American Islamic Relations.
Just 2 days after the mosque was burnt to the ground, there was a pickup truck that drove by yelling epithets to the community members that were standing in the rubble of their house of worship.
Post 9/11, we saw this massive spike in anti-Muslim sentiment. 2007, 2008, it's leveling off.
Corey Saylor is a legislative director for CAIR. Raised as a Christian, he converted to Islam 20 years ago.
And then all of a sudden, 2009, it starts to shoot upward again. And part of that was, conditions in the United States post the election of an African-American president, as well as because of the economy. But then you have this anti-Muslim movement that's sort of egging people on. Fear the Muslims. They're not really a religion. They're all here to conquer you.
According to the FBI, the majority of bias crimes are anti-Semitic. But in 2010, crimes against Muslims increased by 50%. Hate crimes are believed to be fueled in part by Islamophobia.
Islamophobia is closed-minded prejudice against either Islam or Muslims. This core network exists to profit politically and financially from smearing Muslims, Islam, and making people afraid of our faith.
Well, I think the attack on American Muslims today is the greatest threat to religious freedom in the United States right now. The cottage industry, anti-Islam, anti-Muslim cottage industry in America, which is using the so-called war on terror, I think, as an opportunity to say Islam is inherently evil and oppressive. And, of course, conflate Muslims with terrorists. And this is dangerous because the quality of life, freedom to practice who you are, to be a full citizen like everyone else, is really determined by how people around you treat you, not just how the government treats you.
The big issue right now for the Muslim community is the mainstreaming and legitimization of those smears against our community.
Do you see these as isolated cases?
Anti-Muslim sentiment was on display in Congress in March of 2011 when Congressman Peter King called a hearing on Capitol Hill to discuss what he called the radicalization of Muslims in America.
Or is it part of a systemic problem in the Muslim American community? And if it is...
The Peter King hearings had as their central message that the American Muslim mosque-going community is somehow anti-law enforcement, anti-United States.
That concerns me. It's one thing to deal with these things on the fringes, and most of us can speak louder the truth to drown out the fringe.
The First Amendment allows us the freedom of religion.
But when it moves into the mainstream, it's harder to drown it out. It's harder to counter it.
But I will tell you today that this breathing document is in pain.
When a congressional committee singles out one religion and does multiple hearings on that religion, that is an alarm going off, or at least should be, in the minds and hearts of every religious person in this nation. That was a first.
Last year, Republican lawmakers in Tennessee introduced an anti-Sharia bill criminalizing the practice of Islam. Sharia stands for Islamic or sacred law and provides guidance to Muslims on how to live their lives.
It would be to organize a religious class. It's a felony under this law to organize this press conference.
Besides even just Muslims, it's an attack on religious freedom.
In the end, the anti-Sharia bill did not pass.
But the point of these pieces of legislation isn't always to pass. The point is to provide a platform through which anti-Muslim activists can peddle their hatred in a manner that legitimizes the frivolous points that they're trying to make.
I mean, you could have legally protected rights, but if in your community people protest when you go to your mosque, or if your state legislature tries to pass legislation that the practice of your religion is somehow criminal or wrong, they don't have the full protection that they must have under the First Amendment to be on a level playing field with everyone else, and therefore their religious freedom is diminished.
In 2010, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, is the center of a heated controversy over the rights of a local Muslim community to expand its mosque.
A mosque has been in existence there for decades at this point in time, and they decided to expand it to accommodate a larger community. People were outside the building praying in the weather. So when they made this decision to expand a structure that had already been there for years, this upset some of the people in Murfreesboro.
If construction does begin, I would also encourage contractors to boycott it.
This has become what is easily the most stained, hostile, anti-Muslim incident in the country.
It's about stopping Tennessee homegrown terrorists.
Instead of one nation under God, America, they want to make this one nation under Islam.
You have everything from shots fired, property, you have construction equipment burned.
We have a civil rights hate crime, will be determined.
And then you go even further into attacks on individuals associated with the mosque in an effort to have them lose their jobs. And this is simply because they just didn't want people praying outside in the rain.
This past August, after an extended legal battle, a federal judge ruled to allow members to use the newly renovated mosque.
The unfortunate, shall we say, icing on the cake is the church across the street. Once they found out the mosque was finally going to open, erected a number of crosses. So it was a sort of final way of saying, we don't particularly welcome you here, which we find unfortunate and not really in line with the interfaith response that we generally receive. But again, I think the community has learned to take these things in stride. And what they told me is that, well, we use that to find our way to the mosque because Google Maps doesn't show where the mosque is yet, but these crosses show up.
Part of the problem is that all of this propaganda about Islam is going into a vacuum. Why? Because we're religiously illiterate in this country. Many Americans have no idea what Sharia is. So they are susceptible to propaganda, and propaganda, as history shows, works. And they now believe that their neighbors might be, potential terrorists, or that mosque on the corner might be a cell. They believe this stuff, which is absolutely ridiculous. And it's not up to the American Muslim community by themselves to try to correct the record, because first of all, they're going to be demonized, whatever they say. It's up to the rest of us, various faith groups, civil liberties groups, and others, to stand up together and say, look, here are the facts. This is what we were really talking about when we were talking about American Muslims and about Islam in this country. That's what we have to do, and we have to do it loudly.